Hi, this is Dr. Ron Mottern with Mottern Institute for Mind Body Wellness, and this is your weekly Words of Wellness. This week, what I'd like to do is a continuation of what we looked at last time. Last Words of Wellness, we looked at the choice theory psychology aspect of addiction, and especially addiction to alcohol and other drugs. What I'd like to do is sort of continue that this week in light of NPR episode that aired earlier this week that I listened to, and it was looking at, in particular, how to treat meth addiction for methamphetamines. And it was especially interesting because it pointed out that now opioid related deaths have started to decline while meth related deaths have started to increase. So certainly we have some different techniques to treat opioid addiction. Medication assisted treatment, MAT, is the gold standard right now for treating opioid addiction, but we don't have any medication that helps with the methamphetamine addiction itself. Now, there are some drugs we can help with certain aspects of depression that go along with that, or cravings or what have you, but not acting in the same way that medications do for opioid addiction. So that's one of the things that this NPR episode pointed out. On there, they had Nora Volkow. Nora Volkow is the head of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, who pointed out that one of the things that does work has the strongest evidence for helping people overcome meth addiction is that people are offered things like food vouchers. People are offered things like movie passes if they have clean UAs, if they have clean urinalysis. So really looking at that and thinking about last time what we looked at with the basic needs and what have you, those things sort of go together. We know, and I think I talked about last time, how the biggest pleasure in life, and pleasure is just the accumulation of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens of the brain, but the biggest pleasures we have in life naturally are food and sex, okay? And meth is 8 times more powerful than the best food or sex you'll ever have. So once that picture of meth gets into the quality world, it's very difficult to get out because we can't really find anything in the natural world that gives us the same experience. Now, I think I also talked about this a little bit last time, but I want to talk about it again, is as we use substances, as we do anything in life that causes that increase of dopamine in the brain, we have a spike of dopamine and we do things, and as that goes along, those reach sort of a plateau there that we call the hedonic set point. That peak as it goes through, we sort of, as we can make a little plateau there across those experiences, is the hedonic set point in the body. And the body sort of at that point reaches sort of what's called allostasis. Allostasis is a form of homeostasis. Now, what happens when we use things like meth, which bring it way up here, higher than any of those natural experiences? Well, at some point, the body raises that hedonic set point. Once again, reaching that point of allostasis, that homeostasis, just like when we get a temperature or something like that, and the body raises the internal body temperature. The body does the same thing with pleasure, with dopamine. Okay, so we have that point of allostasis that's way up there for that meth, and then when we stop using, then the dopamine levels go back down to normal levels, but the hedonic set point is still up here. So we're not experiencing that same sort of pleasure that we had when we were using methamphetamines or any of the other stimulants as well. Cocaine will do that, not as much as meth does. MDMA, ecstasy, was just a form of methamphetamine. That's what the MA on the end of it stands for, is methamphetamine. Can also do that. But the ability to, between the time when that hedonic set point lowers back down to a normal level and the time we stop using. So the hedonic set point is still up here. I've stopped using already, so my experience with pleasure is down here. So between the time that we stop using and that hedonic set point actually drops there, what happens is we go through a period of time where we can be very miserable if we don't have other things that we are doing to cause pleasure in our life. Now, once again, that pleasure is not going to be quite as much as it was with the meth, but it still allows us to experience some sort of pleasure. So this sort of makes sense on why the research would show that things like food vouchers, food being, once again, one of the basic needs that we have, that need for survival, but also one of the highest needs that we have. And the other one is those movie passes. Now, what would that have to do? What would things like that have to do with it? Well, remember that the movie passes, things like that, remember that fun is one of the basic needs. Now, once again, don't get hung up on the terms there. There are many aspects of that particular need. So fun, learning, excitement, creativity, all of those are talking about the same need. So going, enjoying a movie, that does give us some need fulfillment for that need of excitement, that need for fun that we have. Once again, not quite the same as meth use, however. Especially when you're combining meth with sex and things like that. So not quite the same thing. So what do we do? I mean, we're dealing with people who have a pattern of behavior, more or less, that is not good at delaying gratification, right? That instant gratification is one of the characteristics. I want something and I want it right now. Particularly, I want to feel good and I want to feel good right now. Or I don't want to feel bad and I don't want to feel bad right now. So one of the things that we can do is teach coping skills. Teach those. Those are in the book, right, that we have that I'll show later on. And the other thing, however, that we talk about that is also in the book is the concept of flow. Now, I think I mentioned this last time as well. I'll mention it a little more now. Remember that flow is a state of peak human experience. Now, Csikszentmihalyi started talking about this in the 70s. So it's not a new concept, but it's a concept that has been picked up on in many instances today. So, for example, we have Kotler and Wheel, Stephen Kotler, Jamie Wheel, who run the Flow Genome Project, who are studying flow intensely. Some other organizations are studying that as well. Kotler and Wheel have their book Stealing Fire. So it talks about how the Navy SEALs are using that, how they're using it in Silicon Valley and things like that, trying to get that concept of flow that's going on. The Flow Genome Project, you can log on and see where you are as far as how you get your dopamine needs met and what have you. So this concept of flow is a peak human experience. Now that is something that is as high as meth, if not higher. In fact, if you read some of the research on flow and what have you, once again, this is a peak human experience. Nothing gets us to the point that flow does. And flow is something, and this is what Kotler and Wheel point out, and what the other organizations are looking at, is how do we create that? Now, like I said, Csikszentmihalyi has been talking about that since the 70s. And what we know from flow is that in order to achieve that flow state, I have to have a high level of challenge, but I also have to have a high level of skill. Okay, so if we just sort of put that on a graph, and we have challenge on this, challenge on our y-axis, and skill on our x-axis, then that 45-degree angle, that part up here where both of them meet. So high level of challenge, high level of skill, that's the flow zone. That's where we get. So how do we create that? Well, creating that, as it turns out, is doing many different things. Once again, it has to be challenging. It has to have some amount of skill involved in it, high amount of skill involved in it. So many different things can do that. Csikszentmihalyi started talking about composers who were intently composing as they wrote and what have you, that they reach that state of flow, really, where you have that state where nothing else matters at the time. You're intently focused on this. You're not focused on any other problems. This is what you're looking at. You lose yourself in that project. Time distortions are a part of that. I've lost complete track of time when I was working on this. Those sorts of things. Now, from my own personal experience, oftentimes people who use alcohol and other drugs tend to fall into that high level of creativity, high level of excitement, especially. That's where the instant gratification can become a problem, because I need that high level of excitement in my life and what have you. It's very difficult to find if I'm not looking for something like flow. So working on trying to develop flow through creativity, through music, through parkour, perhaps. If you know what that is, I usually suggest that to my adolescent clients and what have you. Do you know what parkour is? They say yes. I say, well, okay, that's a good way. You have to have a high level of skill, and it's a high level of challenge, and there's a focus on that. But many other things, like I said, music, learning to play an instrument, right? Learning to play a guitar, learning to do something like that, something that will totally absorb my energy. Now, Harvey Milkman talked about this some time ago. He wrote an article, I believe it was for Psychology Today, called Better Than Dope. And he got the title from what he was doing was he had a project where he was teaching inner city youth art. Any kind of art they wanted. They wanted to paint, they wanted to sculpt, they wanted whatever they wanted to do. They would teach them to do that. And Harvey said that one of the kids came up to him one day and said, "Harvey, this is better than dope." And so that's where he got the title of the article. But what that tells us, what that shows is that creativity is the same, it's at that same level. You have somebody who's very creative and becomes very involved in that high level of skill, high level of challenge. There we have that flow zone that they can find, and they have that peak experience, okay, that is created naturally through my behavior rather than through taking alcohol or other drugs, and specifically taking something like meth. So one of the things that we want to look at, once again, for this is meeting those basic needs, and especially for meth addiction, something like that, is that I'm going to have to find something. And what I'm suggesting is that you look for that peak experience. You look for that flow state. For many people, that's what's going to work for them. Between the time when I stop using and I find something else that's going to meet those needs, when that hedonic set point lowers back down to a normal level that I have, then I have to find some way to meet those needs, and finding that flow state can be very important. And I think the information that was pointed out in the NPR episode by Nora Volkow, especially, that talked about, the best research we have these days is things like movie vouchers, things like food vouchers, things like this are incentives for people to do well. They motivate people to do well. And once again, the needs are first and foremost motivators. So what it's saying is that those things are ways that meet my needs. So if you'd like to know more about flow, you can certainly check out my new book. Okay, Dr. Ron Mottern, Living Well, A Guide to Cognitive Behavioral Skills Exercises. We have a section on flow in there. It has some flow worksheets in there, my peak experiences worksheets, things like that. Talks about the concept of flow and encourages people to really get flow. Now, once again, I don't have to be a drug addict to have those peak experiences, right? If I have other things going on in my life, or if I just have nothing going on in my life and I want a peak human experience in my life, right, then I can look for something that gives me that flow experience, where I can achieve that state of flow. I think I mentioned last time as well that William Glasser in the 70s sort of started talking about the same thing as Csikszentmihalyi did. He didn't call it flow, but what he called it was positive addiction. In fact, he has a book on that. It's called Positive Addiction. For him, he was looking at things at the time. Running was one of them. Transcendental meditation was another one. Now, Glasser at the time said that he thought the things that worked for this positive addiction were things that I didn't have to put much thought into. So certainly I can run. I don't have to put much thought into that. Transcendental meditation, I'm not putting a whole lot of thought into that. But what we know now from the flow projects that are going on in our studies of flow, led by Csikszentmihalyi and what have you, is that we do have to have a high level of challenge there and a high level of skill, and things such as that. Once again, I'm composing music or something like that. Certainly, I'm very intent, very cognitively oriented. I'm putting a lot of thought into it. So it's not just something that I don't have to think about. I can put so much thought into it that is what totally absorbs me. So if you're struggling with addiction, especially meth addiction, stimulant addiction, something of that nature, looking for something to give you excitement in your life, find flow. Get the book, get other books, read about flow, study about flow, and how to achieve that flow state until that hedonic set point comes back down. And even after that, you still want to experience that peak state that we have as human beings. And once again, don't have to be a drug addict to do that, and don't have to have any need to do that other than to experience that peak state that we can experience as a human being. This is one of the things that can help, just carrying along from last week and looking at addiction and what have you. This is one of the things that can help that. And once again, we've seen that from the research on what works to help people stay off of meth. We've looked at how effective, seen how effective those things that are focused on creativity and focused on fun and focused on excitement can really be in our lives to help us make other choices. And that's what we're really doing, is once again we're putting other pictures in our quality world, and something like flow, which is that peak state, that's going to become a very clear picture, a very strong picture in our quality world. So we want to make that choice. That will make it easier for us to choose that over choosing something that that is not good for us, and it's not good for other people. So once again, if you'd like to know more about that, there's several books out there. Csikszentmihalyi Flow, Stealing Fire, Kotler and Wheel. You can look up the Flow Genome Project that's online. And also, if you'd like to look a little more, Ron Mottern, Living Well, Guide to Cognitive Behavioral Skills Exercises. Thank you very much for your time. This has been Ron Mottern. Remember, once again, you can check us out at our website, www.modderninstitute.com, and our Facebook page at facebook.com/modderninstitute. And I will put the link to the NPR episode down below in the description so that you can listen to that as well. Thank you. This has been your Weekly Words of Wellness.